Okay, we talked about this, and this is everybody. Everybody's got brainwaves and so on, but not everybody has psychosis. Not, but it's not that rare. Yeah, the numbers range here and there, so I'm not going to give you any numbers, but I'm going to help you understand what psychosis is. So psychosis is a problem with reality. So we want to understand, how do we as human beings perceive reality? Yeah. We spoke just now about stimulus. Yeah. In ADHD, it's about stimulus, selecting stimulus, and so on. So these stimulus, wherever, are received by the senses. Yeah. We have our five senses and more, like, our balance and everything. There's lots of sensory things. It's relayed to the brain. So it comes from our eyes, our ears, and so on. And it's relayed to the brain. And then the brain processes it to understand what it is and to plan what to do with it, and then to actually do something. Okay. So that's an easy way of saying input, output, right? Yeah. And what happens in psychosis is there's a problem in this process of interacting with reality. One is, there can be perception. So the brain captures something even though there was no sensory stimulus. So we call it hallucinations. Yeah. Nobody's saying anything, but the brain says somebody said this. And they actually really, really believe it, because the brain says somebody's saying that, right? They're actually hearing it in quotation marks, because the ear's not hearing anything, but the brain is. Yeah. Hallucinations can be different forms. As I said, it can be, we can see something visually, visual hallucinations. It can be tactile hallucinations. Oh, I've got ants walking over me, or whatever. It can be all sorts of hallucinations regarding our senses, as if they're there when there's nothing there. In psychosis, there can be different types of psychosis. Psychosis is a general term about symptoms of problems with reality. One major disorder that is indicated, has it's about psychosis, is schizophrenia. And in schizophrenia, the pattern is usually auditory hallucination. It's quite interesting, because there can be different hallucinations, but auditory is quite I hear voices. That's like such a theme that our psychiatric association choir of psychiatrists in Jakarta. This is just an offshoot, but the funniest one. Our choir, we have a choir, we sing together. Our choir's name is Hearing Voices. And so, give a big round of applause for Hearing Voices. May you enjoy hearing voices. But it kind of, we're kind of, it's a funny play on it, but it normalizes that, it's something that can happen to people. Yeah. And we can talk about it. That's the whole idea. There are other hallucinations, such as visual hallucinations. And this is interesting, because visual hallucinations are more common in people with, we call it organic brain disorder. What do I mean by organic? Remember the biological in the beginning, and where we talked about the body? Yeah. If, say, for example, someone has a very high fever, then, there might be toxins, there might be infection, whatever. Then sometimes we visually hallucinate. Isn't that interesting? It's a different part of the brain, the visual, cortex, and the auditory cortex. So it's like a dream state. Dreams are more visual, I suppose, rather than the others. It has other components, but there's a strong visual component, right? And so it's like that. You're like in a dream state, kind of, you're seeing things that are not there. So a lot of people, it's interesting, when people are really ill or old, and they're sort of like in the death process, they see things. So we don't know whether this is sort of like in here or not. Yeah. But sometimes just lights or whatever, or they might be talking to someone because they think they see someone. I don't know what's happening, but so so that's the perception. But in schizophrenia, it's not just perception issue. Perception issue also happens with some hallucinogens, right? People take magic mushrooms and all that, and then they perceive a different reality. That's all playing with that. Yeah. But in schizophrenia, there's another thing, which is the brain believes things on its own when actually there's no reality out there that supports it, or the reality out there is sort of vague, and then it's interpreted in a certain way. So, for example, you see movies and everything. There's a lot of paranoid schizophrenia. Yeah. So schizophrenia can be different types. One is the paranoid type when they become very scared, yeah, and very suspicious of people harming them, or things happening, and they start being overly cautious and so on. And that's an example of the reality changing. The reality is neutral, but the interpretation can be, oh, this person wants to kill me, for example. Yeah. I mean, we don't know, right? But if they become very adamant that I am sure he wants to kill me, then we call it a delusion. When we say there's no proof, why do you say that? No, I'm sure, I'm sure. You see, look at his eyes, or something like that, for example. Yeah, they're interpreting it in a certain way. It's delusion. People can be delusional. And sometimes we use the word delusion for people who believe things that climate change doesn't exist. Say, oh, you're delusional. But yeah, but that's like a generic social term for it. Yeah. Well, it can be denial also. They know it, but they don't want to say it, things like that. But anyway, another one is about when they're executing things and they're doing things. You got to plan a response, right? You want to do things and do things. And in certain types of schizophrenia, they're not able to do things in a sort of clear way. So it's like what are they doing? They're just doing things, and I'm like, what are they doing? So we can't understand that, and they can't explain to us what they're doing. Yeah. For example, socially, they're just being naked and then walking around, eating from the garbage. Oh, what do we do with this, right? We have a type for it. We call it hebephrenic schizophrenia. We no longer use these terms, by the way, paranoid, hebephrenic, and so on. We just use schizophrenia. But so you know that there are different sort of types, because they're not paranoid, these people. They're like, I don't care, right? Yeah, but there's a disorganization in how they behave. And at a very, very severe condition, it can be totally physical, where they're actually either moving in ways that are actually moving physically, that's like totally, I don't know where it comes from, or they're not moving at all. So you get people who are like in fetal position, for example, not because they're scared, or in conditions like this, and they're just like this, and then you move their arm, and then they go like this, and move their arm like this. So there's something wrong in the way the brain is functioning to plan what to do with your body and do things. Yeah, and that's also a part of this psychosis sort of group. Yeah, but especially that's found in schizophrenia. In general psychosis, others you don't see it so too much, but and we notice also if people are not treated, it gets worse. So usually when people first get psychosis, it can be like somebody calling their name, and they're like, somebody call me? No. Yeah. And it scares them and so on, right? And then it can get worse, because then they can become delusional, right? Oh, I'm the ghost. Somebody is trying to, mess with my brain, or read my thoughts, or all that interpretation becomes a problem. And then they become disorganized. And if they're not treated really, really badly, people who don't get any medication, we see catatonia. And what's interesting now is there's less of catatonia. And more people are coming in early. So I have people who come in and say, oh my God, I heard my name being called. What's happening to me? Am I going insane? Right? And then we help them. Because it's not necessarily schizophrenia, but usually we treat them with antipsychotics. Antipsychotics stop this process, and it can work really well. It can really save people's lives. So please, if you suspect anything that people need treatment, help them get treated. Yeah. And it can be interesting because it can be sort of looks like ADHD. Say, for example, one person came and it's like, I can't organize my thoughts. It's just going everywhere. I just don't understand what's happening, and so on, right? And then their words, even sometimes it becomes a mess. Like, what are they saying? that we have a program in Indonesia, and then I think they do have it internationally as well somewhere. But the one in Indonesia, we call it Stetosol, stethoscope, but Stetosol. And what people do is they put in their words, like sentences and so on, and then using technology and so on, they're kind of interpreted in terms of how organized are your thinking or how psychotic it is. And then you can kind of get a barometer of, okay, I think you need help, and no, you're fine, kind of thing. Yeah. Because people can be overthinking, but it makes sense. But when it's disorganized, because once I had someone coming in and it's, what are they saying? It makes sense, but it kind of doesn't sort of gel. We call it loose association if it's bad, sort of talking about this, but then it relates to this, but it doesn't really, that kind of thing. Then it can be an indication of a psychotic condition. And when they're treated, it's usually really good. It's usually, not always. Unfortunately, antipsychotics do have side effects, but they're usually manageable because we also have medications to sort of counter the side effects. Interestingly, some of the side effects are physical, so they might move, sort of tremors or sort of aches that sometimes happens. The earlier generation antipsychotics were not so good, so it kind of also reduced people's capacities. Now it's much better, much better. But we can give medication for sort of the symptoms. But the thing that we still are trying to work on is metabolism, because usually people who take antipsychotics for a long time, they start having the metabolism becomes very, very efficient, that they gain a lot of weight, no matter how little they eat or how much they exercise. It can be very annoying for them and cause other problems. So, things like that. It's interesting that they're sort of related. So we don't know whether dietary issues, metabolic issues can be related to these. We don't know. There's a lot of research that needs to be done. Okay. So let me stop again and see if you have any questions. I'll stop recording.